Swallowed some air or something, but I'm ready. A deal may be better than no deal, but the expectations of the climate change conference in Copenhagen are being called a disappointment by many. The agreement was reached in the final hours of the summit between the U.S., India, South Africa, China, and Brazil. And while it addresses the needs of developing countries, it's described only as a first step, and serious work still needs to be done. Ted Chernecki has more.
From the offices of the Wilderness Committee in Vancouver's Gastown, half a world away from Copenhagen, Ben West has been stick-handling the Canadian youth delegation there, offering advice on how to get their message out.
It's been quite an exhausting couple of weeks for all of us involved, both on the home team side and in Copenhagen. We, of course, were hoping for a fair, ambitious, and binding treaty. That's what the sort of international community has been calling for. And most of us, I think, are not especially surprised at the outcome.
The outcome, no treaty at all. Instead, a vague agreement between a handful of countries, including the United States, China, and India, that they would commit to a target of keeping the world's average temperature from rising no more than 2 degrees Celsius. And while all involved say they will set up procedures to prove to the international community that they are actually reducing emissions, there's nothing legally binding.
I don't know how you have an international agreement where we all are not sharing information and ensuring that we are meeting our commitments. That doesn't make sense.
That has been an especially sore point between the United States and China, with China not keen on letting foreigners into the country to watch over its industry. And tension between poor, non-industrialized countries and the heavy polluters of the West was also probably a deal breaker.
The victims of global warming in Africa and the rest of the developing world who have been treated unfairly in the past cannot and should not be condemned to wallow in misery and chaos through no fault of their own.
So with no treaty tonight, there were more protests in Copenhagen and a candlelight vigil. Environmentalists back in Canada believe this country is increasingly being singled out as one of the world's worst polluters and least motivated to do something about it. One of the publicity stunts today in Denmark was to hand Canada the 2009 Fossil Award.
You know, the United States is definitely coming along by at least recognizing that climate change is a serious threat. But if we're not, reducing the amount of coal that we're pulling out of the ground and the amount of power that's being generated by fossil fuels, and, if we're continuing to expand the tar sands, all this discussion is really all for nothing.
So here's a closer look now at some of the pledges. Richer countries will provide $100 billion a year by 2020 to help poor nations reduce their carbon emissions. They will also pay out $30 billion from next year through to 2012. The U.S. will cut CO2 emissions between 14% and 17% by 2020 from 2005 levels, while Japan will cut emissions by 25%. And Russia may also reduce output by as much as 25%. Now, I'm sure that you're thinking, where is Canada in all of this? Well, we lay pretty low at this meeting, and we drew some criticism for our lack of an initiative. A departure from the previous Liberal government's approach at the Kyoto talks on climate change in 1997. But while we are not officially part of this latest agreement, Prime Minister Stephen Harper says that Canada will act in parallel with the United States. Chris, that's tonight's Insight.